In 1945, American soldiers returned to ticker-tape parades and national celebration. 20 years later, the men returning from Vietnam often landed in silence, sometimes hiding their uniforms in airport restrooms to avoid being harassed or spat on by their own citizens. This chart visualizes the human toll. On the left, the 58,220 Americans who died. On the right, the column for the estimated 2 million Vietnamese civilians killed, a staggering loss of life. Vietnam became the first total military defeat in United States history. It left the public divided and the military demoralized, raising a question that would haunt the country for decades. How did a global superpower fall so far? The hostility at home and the tragedy abroad were the result of a disconnect. While young men were being sent to fight and die in the jungle, the narrative they were given by their leaders was beginning to diverge from the reality on the ground. During the 1950s, American policy was guided by the domino theory. This was the belief that if Vietnam fell to communism, the rest of Southeast Asia would follow in a chain reaction, eventually threatening the security of the United States itself. To prevent this, the U.S. supported the division of Vietnam in 1954. Washington backed a regime in the South, primarily to block Ho Chi Minh, a communist leader who held massive popular support from winning a nationwide democratic election. Rather than reacting to a direct physical threat, the United States committed its resources to Vietnam based on a theoretical political fear of communist expansion. Direct military intervention began in earnest after the Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964. President Lyndon Johnson reported a second torpedo attack against the USS Maddox, using it to secure nearly unlimited authority from Congress to use military force. Internal records later showed the second attack likely never happened. Stormy weather and false radar readings provided the administration with the pretext they needed to bypass a formal declaration of war and escalate the conflict. Once on the ground, American troops encountered a landscape they were never trained for. The U.S. military was designed for the clear front lines of the Second World War, but the environment in Vietnam offered no such clarity. They faced the Viet Cong, a guerrilla force that utilized a massive network of underground tunnels and the dense jungle canopy. These fighters moved among the civilian population, making it nearly impossible for American soldiers to distinguish between a farmer and an enemy combatant. This mismatch created a lethal cycle. Military commanders sent thousands of drafted young men into an invisible war, while regularly assuring a White House that the enemy was being depleted and victory was inevitable. The government's optimism was shattered on January 31, 1968. During the Tet Offensive, North Vietnamese forces launched a massive surprise attack on over 100 cities and outposts across South Vietnam. While U.S. forces eventually repelled the attacks, the sheer scale of the offensive contradicted administration claims that the enemy was on the verge of collapse. This realization reached the American public through their television screens when Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in news, declared the war a stalemate. President Johnson realized his public support had vanished. Shortly after, he announced he would not seek another term. The conflict continued to expand under Richard Nixon, leading to widespread domestic unrest. The tension turned deadly on May 4, 1970, when National Guard soldiers opened fire on student protesters at Kent State University, killing 4. The violence of the war had reached American soil. The country was now watching its own soldiers turn their weapons on citizens who were protesting a war their government said was nearly over. In 1971, the internal history of the war's escalation was leaked to the press by Daniel Ellsberg, a former military analyst. These Pentagon papers revealed that multiple administrations had known for years the war was likely unwinnable. The documents contained evidence that leaders misrepresented progress and true costs to Congress and the public. The papers highlighted public relations manipulation. While officials internally acknowledged a failing strategy, they continued drafting thousands of young men to fight. The leaked documents showed that administrations chose to prolong the conflict, trading American and Vietnamese lives to avoid the political embarrassment of a defeat. The war ended in 1975 with the fall of Saigon. As North Vietnamese tanks rolled into the city, the South Vietnamese government collapsed, marking the end of America's involvement and its first total military loss. The aftermath in Vietnam was measured in more than just casualties. The widespread use of Agent Orange, a chemical defoliant, left a legacy of cancer and severe birth defects that has affected generations of Vietnamese families. Returning American veterans faced a different kind of toll. Many suffered from unacknowledged PTSD, leading to high rates of suicide, homelessness, and addiction in a country that seemed eager to forget they existed. The men who had been drafted into the war returned to find themselves abandoned by the same institutions that had sent them to fight. Recognition only began to arrive in 1982 with the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Its design was controversial for its simplicity, eschewing traditional statues for a sunken wall of black stone. It contains the names of the 58,220 Americans who died. There are no political slogans or claims of victory, just a list of the people who were lost. For many veterans, touching these names provided the first sense of peace they had felt since returning. The wall served as an acknowledgment that they had existed and that their sacrifice was real, even if the premise of the war was not. The legacy of Vietnam leaves us with a question that still resonates today. What does a democracy owe the citizens it deceives about matters of life and death? It is a question that remains at the center of a wound that has never fully healed.